So Congress is talking about D.C. statehood. They were talking about it all day today. They're apparently going to be voting on this. And it does look like Democrats will be voting in favor of D.C. becoming a state, whereas Republicans are going to vote against it. And this is a very, very partisan issue. This is absolutely 100% a partisan thing for both sides. This is not just one side partisan. This is just totally partisan. And let me explain. So DC obviously is a heavily Democrat area. So if DC became a state, they would get 2 senators from DC, which I think they were going to call it New Columbia. So let's just call it New Columbia for now. But I don't know if that's what they're going to be calling it when it's all said and done. So New Columbia would get 2 senators. New Columbia would also get some congressional seats. New Columbia would continue to get their electoral college votes that they currently already get in the presidential election. Now, the beef that the Democrats have. So, and all of that, by the way, would be Democrats. So the Democrats would secure a stronger hold in the Senate, getting those 2 senators and a couple of more House seats, or however many seats they think that this New Columbia would get. So Democrats push for this, and Democrats push for it under the guise of, well, there's 700,000 plus people who have taxation with no representation, and it's time that these people are no longer disenfranchised. They deserve a voice. They deserve a vote. And I agree. I'm surprised that they don't have representation, these 700,000 people. I mean, it just seems really absurd. But it's not that absurd, because actually there's about 4.4 million people in our country, or within the bounds of under the sovereignty or whatever of the United States, that don't have any representation. We're going to get into that. But the Democrats say, look, 700,000+ people don't have any representation, and they're being taxed, and they deserve it. And so obviously this is a human rights thing. This is a democracy thing. This is us being the good guys. We're just the good guys, and we're wanting DC to be a state. And the Republicans come up with like really stupid excuses, and they say, well, no, we don't want DC to be a state. And it's obviously partisan why the Republicans don't want DC to be a state. And it's because they would lose their stronghold, and it'd make it harder for them, because there would be automatically 2 senators that are suddenly Democrat and more House seats that are suddenly Democrat. So of course the Republicans, for more partisan reasons, are against DC becoming a state. So here's where this obviously is a partisan issue, where this is just political hackery on both sides, and nobody should be entertaining this at all. First of all, it's very easy to give these 700 people representation, and that is for Maryland to just take back the land and to say, now you're in the state of Maryland. Virginia already did this. So in the beginning, when DC was created, Virginia had to give up some land and Maryland had to give up some land. Well, in the 1840s, Virginia actually retook back some of that land. They said, we're going to take a little bit of this back. So Virginia already did that, including the people that were on that land. Maryland now could easily take back the remaining land, except for the National Mall and the White House and, the various little sections that they want to map out as DC proper, that have to be run by Congress under the federal, that cannot be under state control. Maryland could easily just take back the rest of that land, and those people now have representation in the state of Maryland. That is simple enough. The problem is Democrats who control Maryland don't want DC to go and be part of Maryland. They want those 2 extra senators. So this actually doesn't have anything to do with these people having no representation and being taxed. They are, but although that is what's happening, this is just politics. The DC powers that be, the establishment, have strong-armed Maryland, saying, don't even think about it. Don't even discuss it. Don't entertain it. We don't want you to even go down that road, because we want those seats. So we don't want to give up our power. We instead want to continue advocating for DC statehood, rather than what would be the simple, logical, already done in history before solution, which is just to give that land back to Maryland. That's the answer. It's very straightforward. Maryland won't go along with it because they're run by Democrats. Democrats want DC to be a state. So you see, this is actual political hackery. And of course, it's Republican political hackery, because they're sitting there saying, we don't want DC to be a state because we're going to lose out on 2 Senate seats and yada, 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 right? So where it really becomes obvious is the fact that they continue to push for DC statehood, which really is not necessary, just give it to Maryland, when over 4 million Americans don't have access to vote in Congress. And that is, why are we talking about DC when we have territories? We actually still have colonies, essentially, for the United States, people who are colonized, and they're not given a right to vote. When you look at Puerto Rico, for example, why are we not talking more about Puerto Rican statehood? Why are they not pushing for that more? Why are there not more campaigns to talk the Puerto Ricans into it? Or even better yet, give Puerto Rico independence. If we're really going to be talking about human rights and what's right and what's wrong and who's for democracy and who's really for the people, why are we not talking about independence for places that want independence like Puerto Rico or like Guam or like the U.S. Virgin Islands, right? We've got all of these various different areas with 4.4 million people living in them, and they're not given the right to vote. Now, in fairness, these other territories that are not states where, so this would be, we do have Guam. So we have District of Columbia, U.S. Virgin Islands, North Mariana Islands, American Samoa, and Guam, right? So all of those areas there, only the District of Columbia pays federal taxes. The rest of them don't pay federal taxes. The rest of them pay Social Security. They do pay into some Medicare, even though they don't end up getting Medicare benefits. That's another problem. A lot of them don't get the full benefits of Medicare, but they do have to pay the taxes on that. So District of Columbia is the only one that does have to pay federal taxes. But a lot of these areas would like to be independent from the United States. There was actually discussion about Guam, I believe, and the native people in Guam wanted to have a vote where they would decide on whether or not they were going to vote on their independence. But they said that they only wanted the actual native peoples of Guam to vote. And then it was struck down because some said, no, it was a judge that said, well, that's racist. You can't do that. It has to be everybody who votes, including the American, the mainland Americans who happen to be living on Guam. They get a vote as well. And so it hasn't really panned out for them as well. But they have discussed having some independence. Puerto Rico also would like some independence. There's a lot of people wanting independence in Puerto Rico as well. But, this is where it really kind of shines as partisan hackery, that they're sitting there grandstanding saying, we're for the people, we're for democracy, we're for the good and what's right. And then they completely ignore the fact that we have these territories that also are filled with Americans who are not real, they're half Americans. They're not even full Americans, and they're not given the rights of full American citizenship unless they're on the mainland. They have like these caveats of when they can be Americans fully and when they're not really, and they're definitely not getting any real representation. So, we're going to see where this whole DC statehood thing goes, but it's, I understand it's 700,000 people, and they say, well, that's more people than what's in Vermont and in Wyoming. Those states have fewer people, but DC, it's very clearly, this is a partisan political issue. They're doing it for political hackery reasons. There's no real genuine feeling about these people in DC, about giving them representation. If they really were worried about it, it's a simple and easy solution. It's ask Maryland to take the land back, and that would be the end of it. Case closed. But they don't want to do that. So that is what's going on with that DC statehood situation. I personally do not think DC should be a state. I think Maryland should just take the land back. That's kind of my stance on that. Everybody wins except the Democratic Party that's trying to wrangle a bit more power. And that's my problem with the Democratic Party in general, is I think they do. Same with the Republicans. I mean, they all do it. I just happen to pay more attention to Democrats, so I see it more on that side. And I know that it's the bias in me. But definitely are always trying to, find some sneaky ways to wrangle more power, like what they're doing right now with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, right? They're going to make her president in a couple of years, and then she'll be able to run for another 2 terms after that. And potentially we'll have President Harris for 12 years.